In late 1972, in a converted warehouse gym somewhere in Los Angeles, 8 military personnel gathered for what would become one of the most closely guarded stories in special operations circles. What transpired that night would challenge everything these men understood about combat, strength, and the nature of true mastery. This is the story of a confrontation that lasted 90 seconds, but left an impression that would endure for decades. By 1972, Bruce Lee had already begun his transformation from martial arts instructor to cultural phenomenon. His television work on the Green Hornet had introduced American audiences to a different kind of fighter, faster, more precise, more philosophical than the brawlers they were accustomed to seeing on screen. But within certain circles, particularly among military special operations personnel, Lee remained an unknown quantity. He was a movie star, an actor who choreographed fight scenes for entertainment. The question that lingered in these communities was simple. Could he actually fight? This skepticism wasn't unreasonable. Hollywood had always created illusions of combat prowess. Stunt work, camera angles, and editing could make anyone look dangerous. For men whose lives depended on genuine fighting ability, Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Marine Recon, the distinction between performance and reality was absolute. They operated in a world where mistakes were measured in casualties, where theoretical knowledge meant nothing without practical application under extreme stress. Bruce Lee understood this skepticism intimately. Born in San Francisco, but raised in Hong Kong, he had spent his formative years studying Wing Chun under the legendary IP Man, but Lee was never content with tradition alone. He questioned, experimented, and synthesized, drawing from boxing, fencing, and every martial art he encountered. By the time he returned to America in his 20s, he had begun developing what he would eventually call Jeet Kune Do, a philosophy of combat that emphasized directness, efficiency, and the elimination of unnecessary movement. What made Lee particularly controversial in martial arts circles was his willingness to challenge established orthodoxy. In an era when martial arts schools were often insular and protective of their techniques, Lee openly criticized what he saw as impractical traditions. He argued that real combat didn't respect style boundaries, that a fight was a fight regardless of what system you had studied. This attitude earned him admirers and enemies in equal measure. The private demonstration that night was arranged through back channels, organized by Lieutenant Commander Harmon, an officer who had heard persistent rumors about Lee's abilities. The session was unofficial, conducted away from military oversight, because what was being tested fell outside normal training protocols. The 8 men present represented elite units individuals who had survived the most brutal selection processes in the American military and operated in conditions that would break ordinary soldiers. Among them was Staff Sergeant Ray Dalton, a Navy SEAL with over 6 years of operational experience. At 6 feet 2 inches and 220 pounds, Dalton embodied the physical ideal of special operations personnel. His training had been comprehensive and relentless underwater demolition, close quarters combat, survival in hostile environments. He had deployed to Southeast Asia multiple times, seen genuine combat, and emerged with both the scars and confidence that came from surviving experiences most people couldn't imagine. Dalton's skepticism about Bruce Lee wasn't personal. It was professional. In his world, size and strength mattered. Reach mattered. The ability to absorb punishment and keep fighting mattered. Lee was 5 feet 7 inches and weighed approximately 135 pounds. By conventional military thinking, the physical disparity alone should have been decisive. Dalton had trained with and against larger opponents, had learned to use his size advantage, had built his reputation on being the most dangerous person in any confrontation. The demonstration began routinely enough. Lee moved through basic defensive techniques with some of the younger operatives, his teaching style calm and methodical. He explained concepts with academic precision, adjusting stances, correcting angles, demonstrating the mechanics of strikes with movements that seemed almost casual in their economy. To the watching SEALs, this was interesting but unimpressive. They had seen countless instructors demonstrate techniques in controlled environments. What they hadn't seen was how those techniques performed under genuine pressure, against opponents who weren't cooperating. When the session broke for water, the atmosphere shifted. Dalton approached the mat with the confidence of a man who had never been given reason to doubt his physical dominance. What followed would fundamentally alter his understanding of what combat actually meant. Did Bruce Lee, the silver screen legend, ever face off against a real-life, combat-hardened Navy SEAL? It's a story that has circulated for decades in whispers among martial artists and military operators. A tale not just of a fight, but of a clash between two worlds: Hollywood martial arts and elite military combat. The SEAL, let's call him Dalton, was the real deal, a man trained for the harshest realities of battle. You looked at Bruce Lee and saw a movie star, an actor whose skills were designed for cameras, not for a no-rules confrontation. So he issued a direct challenge. Could Lee's techniques work against what he called a real man? Bruce Lee's response was unexpected. No arguments, no boasting. He simply accepted the challenge. His calmness was unsettling. To the other SEALs watching, it wasn't the demeanor of a performer. It was the quiet confidence of a true master. The confrontation that followed was over in about 90 seconds, but it was a lifetime of learning packed into a minute and a half. Dalton opened with a ranging punch, a feeler to test distance. Lee didn't even block. He just slipped his body about 3 inches, letting the punch glide past. In the same motion, a vertical punch from Lee, traveling less than a foot, landed squarely on Dalton's sternum. Witnesses said it was like watching a man run into an invisible wall. The SEALs were stunned. Where was the windup? The hip rotation? This strike seemed to defy their understanding of physics and power generation. Shaken, Dalton tried again, this time with more technique, a fast jab-cross-hook combination. But Lee was already moving. He slipped the jab, parried the cross, and before the hook could even be thrown, he was inside Dalton's guard, delivering a sharp palm strike to the underside of the jaw. Dalton's knees buckled. The fight was essentially over, but his pride wasn't. Abandoning technique, he charged forward, trying to use his superior size and strength to overwhelm Lee. But Lee didn't back down. He simply angled his body, swept Dalton's lead leg, and used the SEA low zone momentum to send him crashing to the mat. A fist stopped a single inch from Dalton's throat. It wasn't a knockout blow. It was a statement of absolute control. Even after a devastating kick to the hip and an elbow to the temple, Dalton refused to give up. He threw one last desperate punch. Lee caught his wrist, redirected the arm, stepped behind him, and applied precise pressure to a nerve point just below the ear. Dalton collapsed, unconscious. When the SEAL came to, humiliated and disoriented, he didn't face a gloating victor. Instead, Bruce Lee knelt beside him and offered technical advice. He pointed out how Dalton telegraphed his punches by moving his shoulders, how he dropped his guard after a jab. Then, he gave Dalton his personal training address and invited him to come learn, not as an opponent, but as a student. For Bruce Lee, a fight was never about ego. It was about self-discovery. As he told the stunned group of operators that day, the body can be trained in months. The mind takes a lifetime. But the man who masters his mind will never be defeated. Now, is this story 100% historically accurate? It's hard to say. No official records exist, but the core elements of the tale have persisted for years. What remains consistent in every version is a powerful truth. Bruce Lee, his understanding of combat was on another level. Those who challenged him expecting to fight a movie star walked away with a profound lesson about the difference between being a fighter and being a true martial artist. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe for more.